First part is the Solla Prize Award ceremony, and the second part is a combined presentation, panel discussion on indicators. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Wolfgang Glänzel. I think it's like carrying coals to Newcastle. If I talk too much about him, everybody knows him, so I just hand over to Wolfgang.
Thank you very much, Christian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my big honor to welcome you to a very special event in this conference. It's the awarding ceremony of the Derrick de Solla Prize Memorial Award. The prize medal was conceived and launched by Professor Thibaut Braun, the founder and editor-in-chief of the international scientific journal Scientometrics, and is periodically awarded by the journal to scientists with outstanding contribution to the field of quantitative studies of science. It's a good tradition that the awarding ceremony of this medal has become an essential part of the program of ISSI conferences since the foundation of the society in 1993. The first medal was awarded to Eugene Garfield in 1984, and since 1993, the medal is awarded biennially. In total, 24 individual scientists and one team was awarded, and today we will award the 25th prize award. Ladies and gentlemen, just to resolve these 3 question marks, the nomination and awarding committee of the journal Scientometrics has decided to award the 2013 prize medal to Professor Blaise Cronin from Indiana University. And I would like to ask Cassidy Sugimoto to give a short laudation.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure to be here today to introduce Professor Blaise Cronin, the 2013 Derek de Solla Prize Award Medal winner. Most of you know or know of Blaise, and those who know Blaise are rarely indifferent to him. Blaise asks critical questions, takes stances, and is uncompromising in his approach to scholarship. It is precisely for these qualities that we are here today to honor him. Blaise's road to the Prize Award began in Dublin, where he read philosophy, French, and German as an undergraduate. Evidence of this is still present in his scholarship, in which he embeds literary references and linguistic expression. From Dublin, he went to Belfast, where he received postgraduate degrees in education and library studies. However, it was not until his time at ASLIB, where he worked in the research and consultancy division, that his interest in information science began in earnest. He received a doctoral degree in information science from the Queen's University of Belfast in 1983 and published his dissertation on the role and significance of citations in the following year. Blaise's productivity is formidable as his vocabulary. He has more than 300 publications to his name, including 14 scholarly monographs and 132 peer-reviewed articles. This does not include Blaise's books chronicling life in Bloomington, Indiana, or Stickman, his book on goalies. Blaise's scholarly output is similarly diverse. He has researched in a number of areas, including education and professionalism, competitive and strategic intelligence, social intelligence, information management, and pornography. It is, however, for his contributions to scientometrics and scholarly communication that we are here today to honor him. In many ways, Blaise's work in this area is anchored around 3 of his monographs. The citation process investigated the ways in which citations function in the scholarly communication system. The monograph challenged the theoretical premise of the field by questioning the validity of citations as proxies for quality. Blaise demonstrated that citations, like many other units in the scholarly communication system, function within a larger social context and are dependent upon it. His opening line to this text still resonates today as we seek to find and measure traces of scholarly performance in new environments. In his words, metaphorically speaking, citations are frozen footprints on the landscape of scholarly achievement. His rich, conceptually driven microanalyses have sought to elucidate the underlying function of citations and, therefore, the way in which citations can be measured and used. Another of Blaise's core work is his investigations in the notions of authorship. The Scholar's Courtesy examined the sub-authors of scholarly work, that is, those who appear in the acknowledgments but not in the bylines of academic articles. This critical examination into invisible actors in the scholarly communication system long predates the current fascination with traces of overlooked scholarly contribution. In recent years, Blaise expanded this notion to look at the presence of sub-authorship contributions in other areas of creative activity, such as art. Blaise also coined the term hyperauthorship to describe the practice of putting hundreds and even thousands of authors on a byline. This work is even more relevant today than ever in our heightened economy of attention and accelerated pace of publishing. Blaise's answer to this zeitgeist of publishing fervor has been to advocate for slow scholarship, that is, deliberate writing and deferred gratification. The Hand of Science weaves together issues of authorship, sub-authorship, and hyperauthorship, and demonstrates the wide variability in the use of these in scholarly communication. This is an important issue for scientometric studies, as it provides evidence of a lack of consensus about the author, a critical unit of analysis in evaluative bibliometrics. In addition to being a prolific writer and insightful scholar, Blaise is also an effective administrator and accomplished dean. Blaise spent 25 years of his career as administrator at the University of Strathclyde and subsequently Indiana University Bloomington. He was editor for the primary information science monograph series for a decade and served as editor-in-chief of JASIS since 2009. He serves on 22 journal editorial boards and as a reviewer for 40 journals in the field, in addition to his work on grant panels, tenure and promotion cases, and dissertation committees. His service contribution extends from the macro to the micro levels. He not only studies collaboration and sub-authorship, but practices this. The careers of many in the society owe a tremendous amount of debt to Blaise. Kati Borner, Stasha Milosevic, Ying Ding, and I can all thank him for hiring us into academe. Others of you have certainly felt his influence in his meticulous work in editing and reviewing. Although Blaise's conceptual work is built upon a firm historical platform, he is not unaware or uninvolved in changes in the scholarly communication environment. Some of his most cited works have examined or predicted changes in scholarship wrought by technological shifts. For example, more than 20 years ago, Blaise predicted that the university library and university press will converge and be reborn as a new age scriptorium. Public networked hypertext systems will promote popular authorship, radiated reading, and global gossip. Multimedia assemblages will replace monotext delivered on demand and in real time. Those of you tweeting in the audience provide evidence of Blaise's prescience. Blaise may be receiving the highest honor in our field, but he has not stopped looking to the future. His latest project, an edited volume with MIT Press, looks at the proliferation of metrics for evaluating scholarly performance and considers how these metrics can and should be used appropriately by policymakers, scholars, publishers, research administrators, and funding bodies. This book brings together dozens of the foremost scholars in the field of scientometrics to create a work that will heighten the understanding of scientometrics for a larger audience. Blaise's introductory and concluding material for this monograph will, I am confident, serve as significant commentaries in this time of revolution in the scholarly communication system. It is, therefore, without further ado, that I ask you to join me in congratulating the 2013 Derek de Solla Prize Award Medal winner, Professor Blaise Cronin.
Thank you very much, Cassidy, for the laudation. And now I would like to ask Professor Blaise Cronin to come to the floor. So, please, on behalf of the journal Scientometrics, accepting this well-deserved prize.
Thank you very much. Absolutely delighted.
On behalf of the organizers, also.
Thank you very much. The quotation is from Wordsworth. Whither is fled the visionary gleam? Where is now the glory and the dream? Some of you knew Derek Price. Many, if not most of us, never met him. I just missed him at the early part of my career, and what I'd like to do this morning is briefly talk about Derek Price and introduce him to those of you who perhaps don't know a great deal about him. His career began at the University of London, where he studied experimental physics. He took a PhD. He then moved to Singapore and taught for a while at Raffles College. He had a kind of epiphany, moved from experimental physics to studying the history of science, returned to Cambridge and took a second PhD in the history of science. From there to the United States, to the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton University, and then his final move to Yale University, where he became the first professor of the history of science, and until his death was Avalon Professor of the history of science. When he was in Singapore, he was deeply influenced by the writings of a distinguished naval historian, C. Northcote Parkinson, whom most of you probably know for other reasons. He is the author of the famous book, Parkinson's Law, and one of the adages contained therein is that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And I wonder if this thought, this idea of expansion, didn't perhaps have something to do with what I'm going to call Price's first epiphany, his first aha moment. At the time when he was in Singapore, a new college library was being built. And so the story goes, something like 270 volumes, 270 years worth of the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society were actually stored in Price's house. And Price looked at these and he had an insight. He noticed that over time, the size of the volumes increased. And in due course, this resulted in from our point of view, his best-known book, Science Since Babylon, in which he plots the growth of scientific journals and the growth of abstract journals. A couple of years later, he published Little Science and Big Science, and I refer to this here as the exponentialization of everything. If we look at the number of scientists and engineers that are being produced in the United States, if the trend line were to continue, Soon, every man, woman, child, and dog in the United States would in fact be a scientist. And Price wasn't just obsessive about quantification and data tracking in his professional life. Here's a quotation from his wife, his Danish wife, Ellen Hjort Price. She said, "When I began labor with our first child, Derek obtained some graph paper. What to do? To mark down the periodicity of the contractions in an effort to try and predict when the baby would in fact be born." Such is the man in private life as in scientific life. You just saw these two images coincidentally. Price was a man of many parts, many interests, and many great passions. And one of the things that he studied was the history of what's called the prehistory of the clock. And the Antikythera mechanism shown here, which is still being digitally reconstructed, was first explained by him, and his contribution to our understanding of this, what the BBC calls a 2,000-year-old computer. Much of our understanding goes down to Derek de Solla Price. And in fact, if you watch the BBC4 program, The 2,000-Year-Old Clock, you will in fact see significant mention of Derek de Solla Price. I have now received a beautiful medal. Here's a picture of it. And quite coincidentally, Derek Price was himself a collector of antiquarian scientific books, scientific instruments, and medals of science. Not surprising given his distinguished career, he himself received a medal, the Leonardo da Vinci Medal from the Society for the History of Technology. Now, I'm sure Price had many, many aha moments, and I'm just going to focus on two. The first was growth and expansion of recorded human knowledge, and the second was bumping into none other than Eugene Garfield, the father in some respects of citation analysis. And he says, quite unabashedly, "I was inoculated with citation fever shortly before coming to Yale. One memorable day, that unforgettable character, Gene Garfield, appeared. And that's when he fell in love with citation analysis. He was with Joshua Lederberg and Robert Merton, one of the three arguably most important and distinguished academics who very early on understood the larger scientometric, sociological, and historiological significance of citation analysis. For those of you who are younger than I am, this is what citation analysis involved in Price's day, and even in my day in the mid-70s. We worked with microscopic print. All of the work was done by hand. We couldn't conceive of the kind of studies, massive studies with millions of data points that are done today. And Price, ever intuitive, ever perspicacious, realized that even he didn't quite understand the potential significance of developments in computational science and what it would do for the kind of studies, the scale of studies that we would be able to undertake in this field. It would soon become possible, he says, to do classes of jobs at 1 year that had simply not been conceptualized the previous year. Price, sadly, I never met him, as I said, passed away in 1983, and the phrase annus mirabilis, annus horribilis is, of course, attributable to Queen Elizabeth II of England. Price died. He was a man who was full of life, great vim and passion. And I published a little book that Cassidy referred to called The Citation Process. And something else happened in 1983. Cassidy was 1 year of age. You saw the list of the great and the good. I find myself in the most lustrous of company. All of these names are people whom I know personally or know of through the work, the writing, the scholarship, the research. Every one of them I respect greatly. But of course, there is one, in my view at least, who is primus inter pares, and he has a blue star beside him, Robert Merton, who is arguably one of the most distinguished sociologists of the 20th century, and not just in the United States. He was, I suppose, if I said a childhood idol, I would be exaggerating. But I remember when I was a student in the 1980s, he wrote for an off-print of a paper I'd written. I probably have his request framed somewhere, not realizing he sent out thousands of such requests every day. Now let's look at the population of people who have been lucky enough to receive this medal. Where do they come from? Who are they and what are they? Well, basically, they come from North America, primarily the United States, and from Western and to a lesser extent, Central Europe. It's really a somewhat selective picture that emerges. my wife was sitting beside me and leaned over, knowing nothing of this field, and whispered, at last, when Kate's picture appeared, at last a woman. I exclude myself from these analyses, but they simply would exaggerate what you're going to see. So far, 24 recipients have been male and 1 female. And what's very interesting is when I look out in this audience, I see an utterly different demographic. And I would wager that in the years to come, sooner rather than later, this demographic will change in terms of the awarding of the medal. I make no value judgment. The average age of the recipients, well, we have the whippersnapper Wolfgang Glänzel at a mere 44 years, and the patrician Merton picking his up at age 85, when most of us are long gone and buried. It's 100% Caucasian, 17 Europeans, and 8 North Americans. How do you get one of these delightful medals? What does it take to be up here in Vienna or Turkey or wherever it's going to be next? Well, Wolfgang Glänzel and Ole Persson did a little study, and they said, well, a scientist with an H-index of 10 or above in quantitative science studies can reasonably be considered a possible candidate. A year later, Judith Barlian did a study looking not just at Web of Science data, but also Google Scholar data, and the numbers have crept up a little bit, rounded up to about 14. So if you've got 14, you may just be in the running, but I think not. I found this paper. It's a master's student dissertation in Chinese. I think I got the numbers right. I didn't understand a single word of the paper. But the range is very broad. I think that's understandable given the historical nature of this. But the mean, median, and modes are all very similar. So I think you're going to have to be aiming now for about 16 or 17, and by the end of this talk, probably 18 or 19. And none of this captures, unfortunately, what Price referred to in one of his papers as the mavericity of science. He was a unique individual, a brilliant scholar, his own man. And one of the things that he valued was individuals who broke with convention, who challenged fixed assumptions, who broke the rules to a certain extent. And that's what he meant by mavericity. And I suspect that the H-index and the G-index and the P-index and all the other little indexes and modes simply cannot capture that ineffable notion of mavericity. Who are the recipients of the medal? Well, in the main, I would say scientists and mathematicians, a growing number of social scientists at the harder end of the social sciences, very few humanists. I suppose I'm a humanist of sorts. And again, when I went back through Price's writings before coming here, I dug out this phrase. He talks about the humanities of the sciences and a mid-region between the humanities and the sciences. And I suspect with the growth of quantitative techniques in humanistic scholarship and research, that it may just be the case that more and more individuals from a classic humanities background will find themselves coming to meetings like this and publishing in our journals. Where is the work done? Where are the metropoles of metrics? Are there a small number of research hubs, what the sociologist Tom Gearon calls truth spots? Will these persist, or will new ones emerge? Are these centers of research institutionalized, proto-institutionalized, or are they basically one-person shows? When that individual moves on or dies, the institutional effort dissipates. Is the center, looking globally, is the center of scientometric gravity shifting from North America and Western Central Europe to other parts of the globe? This is a map of information science, which is not isomorphic with scientometric research, but it'll do. It's by Ledersdorf and Ole Persson. And if you look at it, you see a concentration in North America, you see a concentration in the middle, which is Europe, and you see a concentration on the Pacific Rim. But the Pacific Rim hasn't appeared in any of our data up until now. It's as if this entire chunk of the globe is absent from the leading demographics around the Price medal. That probably will change. Cassidy did allude to the fact that we have a book forthcoming in which we caution against cavalier use of metrics. This point was made yesterday morning during the ceremonial introductions. Price, I think, rather presciently referred to the political arithmetic of science back in 1961. And of course, that other visitor to the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton, Albert Einstein, said, notably, at least he's purported to have said, not everything that can be counted counts. And not everything that counts can, in fact, be counted. We should heed that adage. For the simple reason that impact is not reducible to an H-index, to an impact factor or a raw citation score. Impact is diffuse, complicated, multidimensional, and temporally influenced. And Price puts it in his inimitable style. Who, he says, dares to balance one paper of Einstein on relativity against even 100 papers by John Doe, PhD, on the elastic content of the various timbers of the forests of Lower Basutoland? Quite so, Derek. And this raises the question of apples and oranges. And I mean no disrespect whatsoever to Jorge Hirsch, who introduced the H-index in his 2005 paper. It's had a tremendous impact, a vitalizing impact to some extent in our field. It has spawned a great deal of replication and extension studies. And every time somebody does a G or an H index or a P or an XYZ index, they're going to cite Hirsch. And I did a very quick and dirty citation count, looking at citations to Price's seminal text, Little Science, Big Science, and Hirsch's seminal paper on the H index. And what we look at, very crudely speaking, is there isn't a great deal of difference in measurable impact using citation data. But I would argue, and again, no disrespect to Hirsch, are we saying, therefore, that Price's contribution is no greater than that of Hirsch in his Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences paper? Jonathan Ferner wrote 2 delightful essays on Little Science, Big Science to celebrate its published anniversary. And he concluded his 2 papers by asking the question, or making the statement rather, that when it comes to the theory and practice of scientometrics, Price really has said it all. And my question is, what's left? If in fact he has. And I suppose it would be an admonition, a warning. Beware counting angels on bibliometric pinheads. There are persistent and profound issues relating to construct validity, reliability, the utility of these measures and indicators, the ethicality of their use, their actual usability, and the transparency of the platforms and systems and data sets from which we derive our conclusions and our evaluative assessments of individuals, programs, and research institutes and universities. Writing again in Little Science, Big Science, Price asks, or states, now that we have achieved a reasonably complete theory of scientific manpower and literature, we must look to the social and political future. Now, he wasn't aware of developments that we face today, but I think, in a sense, I like to think that he somehow intuited that there were significant cultural consequences of extensive metricization or alternative metricization. And I'll finish here by, Cassidy did allude to one of these books. We have 2 monographs, edited monographs, coming out next year, which take a somewhat critical, I would say overall, a somewhat critical stance, and address growing concerns relating to what is variously referred to as the emergence of an audit culture, and what I've called elsewhere the emergence of a mandarinate of metrics. One book is called Beyond Bibliometrics, of what comes after classical bibliometrics, and the other is Putting Metrics Under the Microscope. And I think these 2 books, I hope, will raise questions that will cause a community such as this not to become overly obsessed with or fetishistically attached to measures for their own sake. I'm absolutely delighted to receive this award. I am humbled by it, and I thank you very much for your attention.